Hey there, I'm Melissa Klein, and just wanted to introduce to you this concept. These are the roses that we are going to be looking at. And this triple Venn diagram that I'm so proud of. I know you're tired of it, you're over it, and I'm like, no, no, I want you to have this in your brain. Um, so just the idea that color, any color you arrive at is actually an intersection of these three concepts of color, value, and chroma slash saturation. Um, all right, now I will hide this Venn diagram, but you will remember it because you don't want to see it again. I'm like, yeah, I'm so proud of it. It's ridiculous. Um, but there it is. And here I have two examples of roses that are kind of cool because they are a good demonstration of the one on the top is obviously much lighter and brighter, and the one on the bottom is darker and more saturated. One of the things that I don't feel like I quite explained in my last demo is that it's very hard to separate out saturation from darkness because as things get more pigmented, they do get darker. And so that's just a little bit of a clarification. Although you can have something that is highly saturated and very bright. So like this green, bright green swatch, which is like right in the middle of that palette thing. Great example of something that's very bright, very saturated. And I'll pull up the color wheel, and you can kind of see a little bit too, like as if I go like this, and I'm going on the outside of the color wheel, like those are all highly saturated and highly bright for the most part colors. Although, again, even though like this blue, it's highly saturated, but it's kind of darker. So it also depends on the color family. Obviously, if you're talking about your bright yellows, your bright greens, and even into your oranges. But again, you get into your reds, highly saturated, even pulling that all to the top of the thing, there's still going to be, depending on the color, it's going to get an intersection of lightness and darkness. You guys are like, stop it with the disco lights. I'm like, I can't. I need to. All right, now if I go more in towards the white part of the color wheel, you can see these are all variations of bright and light, and how those kind of, I think of that as kind of more the pastels. But again, you can have something that is very high saturation and also very bright, which is a different type of brightness than, let's say, something like this. So just more food for thought. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is pull some color swatches off of both of these roses so that you can compare what the colors are and how the brightness and lightness intersect. And I love being able to demonstrate this to you on the iPad, which just shows it very clearly. Because a lot of times as a painter, what happens is I'm mixing colors and I'm matching them quite often pretty accurately, but also when you put them in the context of painting, as we learned in an earlier color exercise, that a lot of times colors just change depending on context. So here what I'm doing is I'm going to look for a fairly saturated, as much as I can, like a fairly saturated area that is, also, yeah, so very dark or whatever. So again, here we go again with my childhood pink and green color scheme coming back to haunt me, this thing. And I'm going to switch over to the watercolor brush because I think that kind of gives you a little bit of a more sense of the paint going on. And I'm going to do a little line to kind of, so we have some quick notes about where this is coming. Where did I get that color from? In terms of the rose, and I got it from somewhere in here. Okay. A good rule of thumb is to think about what is your lightest light and your darkest dark. All right. What I did there is I picked kind of a mid-tone. Let me go for the darkest dark. And here I'm going for like this little corner. And it's like this incredible, you know, rusty thing. I'll do the arrow while I'm at it on that tool. And pick that out again. And you can see, wow, how that works. Lightest light on the rose. There's always a little bit of debate, but I think most people would generally say, I mean, I was kind of debating, and in fact, I can even compare on this tool. I was debating between this sort of, there's the petal on the bottom here, also seems quite light. Actually, that would be a good comparison. And then as well as up here, seems quite light as well. But I'm going to stick with this for now. And art's fairly forgiving that way in some ways. And this is interesting too, because what we're getting here are not only color shifts, or not only value shifts, but also color shifts. This is almost looking like a bubble gum bluish pink to me, versus a more, the rusty brown color of the darks, and the saturation of and brightness of what I would call, more the mid-tone value, which means it's not the darkest, it's somewhere in the middle between the dark and the light. That's the definition of anything that is a mid-tone. A lot of times what I like to do is start with thinking about a mid-tone, because when I look at overall this rose, which of these three colors do you think you see which color do you see the most? And for me, it's that. Let's hope it's for all of it. I think people generally agree that it's mostly variations on this color, which is great because that makes our life pretty simple. And just really briefly, I'm going to compare what does this look like. And no, it's slightly darker. And what does up here look like? Trying to see if I can get something that's a little brighter. It is a little bit brighter than the first color. So it's subtly different. Here, I'll put it right next to it so you can compare a little bit easier. Very subtly different. It's actually a little bit less saturated and a little bit grayer. So like that, you're like, what? Yeah, it's not much, but it's just like, and of course it's bleeding into the next. Let me see if I can just do that so it doesn't bleed. And you can have a little bit better comparison there. But ever so slightly less saturated and a little bit grayer than the top one. So there's that. And then in this bottom rose, what is the general overall color of this one? And, somewhere in here, I would say is the, just trying to, there we go. And it's looking, and I'm going to set this up a little bit differently so that it's more this, if this is the middle tone, that's going to be in the middle. And then if this is my darkest dark, very similar to the one on the top, just sort of finding that little crevice in there. And put that down here. And now this next part is kind of cool. You have light shining through the rose. And so you're getting something that when that light comes through, as well as on top of it. So when you have this happening, this is coming through it in places. In fact, I'm going to pick a little bit different. And as it's coming through it, depending on the density of the petal and the angle, there's variations. But I would say they're pretty much falling into that, into this sort of color family. So there's that. As well as light landing on top of the petal in this area here. And so it's getting more white in there. You're like, brain's exploding. We hate you. I know. I'm so sorry, darlings. And then, just looking for what is the lightest light on this rose. And I've got two sort of top contenders here. One is this little kind of just, and to be honest, if I was to paint this one, I probably would kind of skip this little thing because I feel like it's a little bit of a distracting detail. But as you can see, it gets, when I get right on that little spot, I get this kind of like whitish pinkish thing. And then here, similar thing. And I'm just kind of, color is very hard to remember if, a lot of times that's why designers will use like swatches and things like that, because you can describe it and you can think you have it in your head, but when it's not until you see it side by side in real life that it really kind of makes that you're sure of it. So in this case, that's it. I'll just kind of, and in fact, I'm going to scooch it over a little bit and say, you know what? This slightly darker color to me is more like the highlights in general that are happening on this rose. So there's that. And I would also encourage you guys really explore your midtones with this. There's like a whole world of midtones. A lot of times people do a really good job of, seeing the lights and the darks. And we all have our own little biases. I tend to paint sort of dark and saturated. I'm like, I guess I'm just being dramatic again. And some people tend to paint a lot fainter and lighter. It's not necessarily wrong or right. It's just a matter of, I think of it as kind of like vocabulary. Shakespeare was known to use a huge vocabulary, and in fact, when they come up with, possible manuscripts that were, that could be, mysteriously attributed to Shakespeare that they think were maybe long lost, one of the things they use to evaluate that is the use of the language and the vocabulary. But on the other end of the extreme, of course, is Dr. Seuss, who was able to write very beautiful, wonderful children's books with, just a few words, because the understanding being, we want the kids to learn this structure and this clarity of language. And I'm going to pull a couple of midtones off of this rose as well, so that you can kind of see sort of the mid-tone evolution here. And, it's not necessarily that one is bad or the other. I mean, you could say like things done in what I call glorious black and white can be so effective and so beautiful and dramatic. And you could say, well, that's really only using, if it's black and white, literally you're only using, 2 words essentially, or 2 colors in there. Versus some of the really beautiful, like, paintings, I think, by, Redoute or the Dutch masters with their still lifes and things like that. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get into painting a rose, and every rose has its thorns. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. You have a fabulous day. Thanks for putting up with me.